Well, Marc Miller is Canada's Minister of Indigenous Services. He joins me now. Minister Miller, thanks for taking the time to speak with me today. It's good to see you again.
Hi, Peter.
Look, let's begin with the $27 million left from Budget 2019 to fund the searches of possible mass grave sites at former residential schools. That's from a pool of $33 million in Budget 2019. And I guess I'm wondering what's taken so long to get that money to Indigenous communities so they can conduct these searches.
Yeah, look, I wish I had a better answer for you. Certainly in Budget 2019, there was that large sum to respond to calls to action 72 through 76. What we do know is there's a lot more truth to be uncovered, and some pretty ghastly truths that the discoveries this week certainly evidence. Every single Indigenous community in Canada is hurting, and so frankly, my focus right now is ensuring that the communities that are affected, and there are several dozen of them that sent their kids or had their kids taken to the Kamloops school, get the supports they need, and we actually give them the space they need to heal and to commemorate and establish the protocols to properly honor the children and that they found. So, there's a number of steps to this. I think foremost in all this, Peter, and I do recognize that Canadians are eager to hear quick and swift action, as always, from the feds. But we have to have Indigenous communities at the center of this discussion. In the case of Kamloops, this is something that's been going on over decades, largely on their own dime. And there has been some money supplied by the feds, but clearly we'll be there to support communities.
Yeah, and I want to dig a little deeper into how this process works, because it is a delicate process. And I think it's worth spending some time talking about how it needs to unfold. But so 2 years the money's been sitting there available, but and it's suddenly ready to roll out the door after the remains of 215 children are discovered in Kamloops. And I guess you'll understand the timing may raise some questions about whether the government has moved too slowly here and is now suddenly trying to hurry this money out the door because of what's happened in Kamloops. Can you address that?
Look, the eyes of our nation, Peter, are fixed on this particularly painful moment, particularly so in Indigenous communities where people are being are triggered, are reliving some very real memories that, frankly, the existence of which people in Canada denied. And so when we talk about expediency, the government needs to be there, but foremost with Indigenous communities front and center. This is not money, certainly, that's being pulled out of thin air. It was provided to respond to those calls of actions during Budget 2019. And absolutely, there's certainly time to reflect on the speed of reconciliation. This is a government that has put financial capital, political capital into this, and indeed has achieved a significant amount of progress, more than any government in Canadian history. But again, it's not really the time to start talking about how great things are. This is a time of pain and suffering, and time for us to give space to Indigenous communities to express that pain and suffering and proceed along that difficult path of truth, which is the only proper way to heal.
There were some 140 residential schools, even a few more than that. Do you have a sense of how many communities are going to want to conduct these searches and access this money?
I do not, and I think that'll take some time to congeal. There have been some very public requests, one of which came from Six Nations, the largest Indigenous community in Canada, with the Mohawk Institute being equally large as Kamloops, making a very specific public demand, and regional organizations. There are certainly, this has to be community-led. We're talking about people's cousins, aunts, uncles. People want answers, but certainly it is a very, very delicate situation. I've certainly faced ones in Montreal where communities have taken quite some time to repatriate bones, and there have been some disagreements as to how to proceed, but it's something that has to be proceeded with respect and with the communities at the forefront.
Can your government guarantee that every community that wants to do this kind of an investigation will get federal funding to do it?
Well, as we've said, we will be there for them every step of the way. We have a sense, as you mentioned, as to the communities that were affected, and where communities sent people to schools. People may want to memorialize in different ways, but certainly the federal government will be there. And I want to add this, we've had a lot of outreach from the provincial governments who have a very important role to play, particularly in Call to Action 71 when it involves provincial coroners, and they have pledged their support as well. So I think that is somewhat heartening to see as well.
Can you Talk a little bit more about the way this process needs to unfold. You've talked about the fact that Indigenous communities have made it clear to the federal government they do not want a top-down process, that it has to be driven by those communities. Tell me about that.
Well, this is, we're talking about potentially crime scenes with an unknown number of bodies, some very young. I think a lot of us are still wrapping our heads around how someone as young as 3 years old can be there, but my understanding is entire families were taken at times. There can be many views, all valid within communities as to how to proceed. And I can also anticipate different points of view. So again, this may seem to people as expressing uncertainty. Certainly, to some extent, it is. But we have to let those communities come together and establish those protocols as to how remains are treated. In the case of Kamloops, we are dealing with more than one community, indeed close to 30 that had children taken away. So, they have to go through their ceremonial fires and their protocols, which they are going through now, and come to one mind as to how to proceed and honor and do further investigations if needed. Again, this is a community that's been at it for, I believe, over a decade, right. So it predates even the TRC.
The United Nations called for Canada today to conduct an exhaustive investigation to find the Indigenous children who died in residential schools, including forensic identification. Will your government commit to doing that?
We'll commit to walking that path with communities, Peter. I understand the important calls to action through 71 through 76 that ask us to do that. But what they do and they instruct us to do is to put the most affected communities at the forefront of this discussion. So we'll walk at their pace, which is and that is important, particularly in a time of grief. I find it important not to put my own sense of distress on their shoulders because they are feeling that, and I think that's something we all have to remember, that we have to respect this time period, particularly in an era where people want quick answers, and indeed there are none.
A couple of quick questions to finish up here. This horror discovered at Kamloops says it's reignited the debate over the monuments to those historic figures who were architects of the residential school system, such as Sir Johnny MacDonald. And you held a news conference today in the Sir Johnny MacDonald building in Ottawa. There's a monument to him on Parliament Hill. Should those nameplates and those monuments and those buildings named after those individuals who played a role in residential schools, should they be removed?
Oh, look, that bitter irony didn't escape me at all, Peter. Clearly, John A. MacDonald is a father of Confederation. The discussion in and around his legacy is one of bitter partisanship. I don't want it to be like that, and I am not someone that wants. We need all parties to pull together, all political parties to pull together, and that debate in and around John A. MacDonald quickly descends into partisanship. As a personal matter, I don't believe in tearing things down and destroying those statues. I believe fundamentally that we need to continue to educate. I understand the sentiments of those who would want to see that happen, but I feel that gives Canadians opportunities to look away and to deny that these atrocities happened. And if you can explain, if you can educate, if you can go past people's willful blindness, I think it goes a longer way in making sure that these things don't repeat and perpetuate themselves. So when it comes to the legacy of John A. MacDonald, I don't personally believe these statues should be ripped down. I think there should be some explanation as to his role in the residential school disgrace. It is a continuing national shame in the trauma that it continues to perpetuate on Indigenous peoples. So that is my short view on it.
Let's finish on this. There are also renewed calls for the Catholic Church and the Pope in particular to apologize for the role of the Church in the residential schools saga. You share those calls. Why?
Well, I feel it's the right, as a human being, I feel it's the right thing to do. They haven't done so. Other religious organizations have. The Anglican Church has. The United Church has. It just needs to be done. I think it continues to rub salt into some wounds that have been reopened this week. In particular, I believe in the good faith of the Pope and his desire to apologize. There is also some responsibility on the Canadian Council of Catholic Bishops and that responsibility lies squarely with them as they take their responsibility for this particular moment in Canadian history.
All right.
I do want to stress, though, Peter, in concluding,
Yep.
I'm not a Catholic, and so I think this is a discussion for Catholics to hold their church to account. Sometimes I feel uneasy calling out other denominations, but I did spend time in a Catholic institution. I know enough to feel that I have a view on that, but I do want to be respectful of my fellow Catholic Canadians as well at the same time, who I think share my view.
All right, Minister Miller, good for your time. Good for taking time to speak with me tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.